In the quiet moments before dawn, when the sky is neither fully dark nor fully light, human beings have long sensed that the world itself may be divided. Not violently divided, not broken, but organized, somehow around a tension. The tension between warmth and cold, between safety and danger, between the fire burning inside the shelter and the darkness pressing gently against the outside of the walls. This sense of division is very old, older than any scripture, older than any organized religion. It may be as old as the first moment a human mind became aware enough to notice that some things sustain life and others threaten it, that some choices lead toward flourishing and others lead toward harm, that the world contains within its extraordinary complexity something that seems to function like contrast, light and darkness, good and evil, order and chaos, being and nothingness. Different traditions have described this contrast in very different ways. Some understood it as a cosmic war, a genuine and urgent struggle between opposing forces of divine and anti-divine energy, with real consequences for the whole of existence. Others understood it as a natural balance, the complementary rhythm of two qualities that together make up a whole, neither of which could exist without the other. Still others place the contrast primarily within the human being itself in the choices made, the intentions held, the gradual cultivation of one quality of being over another. Tonight on First Beliefs, we move slowly through these different visions of light and darkness. We are not here to decide which vision is correct. We are here to ask why the vision arises at all, why so many different cultures, in so many different ages, have reached for the language of duality when trying to describe the deepest nature of reality and the deepest challenges of a human life. The sky outside is beginning to pale almost imperceptibly at the eastern edge. Let us begin there, in the tradition that gave the world perhaps its most fully elaborated vision of cosmic moral struggle. The Fire and the Darkness, Zoroastrian Dualism. The high plateaus of ancient Persia stretch wide and open under a sky that is, in certain seasons, almost transparent in its clarity. The stars at night are extraordinarily visible. The sun at midday is unsparing. And the movement between light and darkness, the daily drama of the sun's rising and setting over the open land must have been felt by the people who lived there with a particular vividness. It was in this landscape that one of the ancient world's most fully developed visions of cosmic duality took shape. The tradition known as Zoroastrianism, centered on the teachings attributed to the prophet Zarathustra, offered a vision of existence in which the fundamental nature of reality was understood as a struggle between two opposing principles, one of truth, light, and creative order, and one of destruction, deception, and darkness. In Zoroastrian belief, the supreme divine principle was known as Ahura Mazda, a name that carries meanings of wise lord or lord of wisdom. Ahura Mazda was understood as the source of all light, truth, and righteous order. In opposition to this principle stood a force known as Angra Mainyu, sometimes translated as the destructive spirit or the hostile force. These two principles were not equal in a permanent or final sense. The tradition held that the force of light and truth would ultimately prevail, but they were understood to be genuinely in contest, and the outcome of that contest was not predetermined in any simple or immediate way. What made Zoroastrian dualism remarkable was how deeply it implicated the human being. This was not a struggle happening somewhere far above, in a realm that had nothing to do with ordinary life. It was a struggle in which every human choice participated. To speak truthfully was to add to the force of light. To deceive was to add to the force of darkness. To act with justice and generosity was to contribute to the creative order of Ahura Mazda. To act with cruelty or dishonesty was to serve, in some sense, the destructive principle. The moral life, in this understanding, was not simply a private matter of personal virtue. It was a cosmic participation. The individual soul, moving through the world day by day, was understood to be contributing with every action, every word, every intention to one side or the other of the great balance of existence. This gave to ordinary human choices an enormous significance. The farmer deciding whether to deal fairly with a neighbor, the merchant deciding whether to honor an agreement, the parent deciding how to raise a child in the qualities of truth and care. Each of these choices was, in Zoroastrian understanding, a small act of cosmic consequence. The tradition also developed a rich understanding of what happened to the soul after death. The bridge of judgment we have visited in an earlier episode, and a vision of ultimate history in which the forces of light would finally prevail. The world would be renewed and all souls would be purified and restored to their proper relationship with the divine order. What is philosophically striking about this vision is the clarity of its moral architecture. The world is not morally ambiguous. In Zoroastrian understanding, it is morally structured. There is a right direction and a wrong direction. There is a principle of truth and a principle of deception. And every conscious being capable of choice is, by virtue of that capacity, already participating in the contest between them. This clarity, this moral transparency of the universe exerted an enormous influence on the religious traditions that developed in its cultural neighborhood. Historians and scholars of religion have traced threads of Zoroastrian influence through the later development of Jewish thought during and after the period of the Babylonian exile, and from there into early Christian and Islamic traditions. The specific forms these ideas took were different in each context, but the underlying structure, the sense that the universe is morally ordered, that good and evil are genuine and opposing forces, and that the human being is called to choose between them, carries recognizable echoes of what was first so fully articulated in the high plateau world of ancient Persia. Let us follow one of those threads now, carefully and gently, into the world of early Christianity. The Adversary, Shadow and Light in Christian Tradition. The figure most widely recognized in Western culture as the embodiment of evil, the figure known by various names including Satan, the devil, and Lucifer, did not arrive in fully formed theological detail all at once. Like so many of the most significant ideas in religious history, this figure developed gradually across centuries of textual reflection, cultural exchange, and evolving theological understanding. In early Christian tradition, believers came to understand the universe as the creation of a God who was entirely good, entirely the source of light, love, and being. But this raised an immediate and serious philosophical question. If the creator of all things is entirely good, where does evil come from? If the universe originates in light, how did darkness enter it? Early Christian thinkers explored this question with considerable seriousness and variety of perspective. Some texts and traditions describe the figure originally among the highest of divine servants, a being of great light and intelligence who turned away from the good through an act of pride or rebellion. This turning away was not a creation of something new. It was, in the understanding of many early thinkers, more like a privation, a turning from the source of being and light, and thus a diminishment, a kind of voluntary movement into shadow. The name Lucifer, which appears in early Latin translations of the Hebrew scriptures, meant something like light bearer or morning star, a reference to the bright planet visible just before dawn. Followers who encountered this image in scripture came to interpret it as a description of something that had once been bright and had fallen. The light bearer who had fallen from light, the morning star that had descended into darkness. This is a genuinely poetic and philosophically interesting image. It suggests that evil, in this understanding, is not something that exists independently of good, not a co-equal opposing principle in the way that Angra Mainyu was understood to oppose Ahura Mazda in Persian thought. Rather, it is something that arises from within the good, from the freedom and intelligence that are themselves expressions of the divine creative order through a movement of misdirection, of turning away from the source. In early Christian tradition, the figure of Satan, a word meaning adversary or one who opposes, served several distinct conceptual functions. In the oldest layers of the Hebrew scriptural tradition that Christianity inherited, the term referred to an adversarial role rather than a specific named being a prosecutorial function, one who tests and challenges. Over centuries of theological reflection, this role gradually consolidated into a more personified figure, the embodiment of opposition to the divine order, the one who tempts and deceives, the adversary of the human soul's movement toward the good. Early Christian texts describe this figure as the source of temptation, not the source of the human capacity for wrongdoing, which was understood to lie in human freedom itself, but the one who attempts to persuade human beings to exercise that freedom in directions that move them away from light and truth. The struggle in this understanding was not primarily a cosmic battle happening on some distant plane of existence. It was happening within the human heart in the quiet drama of every choice between honesty and deception, between care and cruelty, between the movement toward light and the movement toward shadow. The imagery that early Christian communities used to describe the struggle was saturated with light and darkness in ways that felt natural and immediate in the Mediterranean world of the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era. Candles lit in dark rooms, the breaking of dawn after a long night, lanterns carried through unlit streets, stars appearing over a darkened landscape. These were the images through which early believers understood the contrast between the state of confusion and the state of clarity, between the condition of being lost and the condition of being found, between what the tradition called sin, the tendency to move away from the good, and what it called grace, the movement of divine light toward and within the soul. What is philosophically notable here, when placed beside the Zoroastrian understanding, is both the similarity and the difference. The similarity is the moral seriousness, the sense that the universe has a genuine moral structure, that the choice between good and evil is real and consequential, and that the human being is called to participate consciously in that choice. The difference lies in the metaphysical architecture. Where Zoroastrianism posited two originating principles in genuine cosmic opposition, early Christian theology worked to maintain the absolute primacy and goodness of one divine source, understanding evil not as a co-equal opposing force, but as something that arises within the freedom and intelligence that the one good source has created. This distinction may seem subtle, but it carries within it a very different way of understanding the nature of darkness and what might be done about it. If darkness is a co-equal force, the task is to fight it with whatever light one has, and to hope that light will ultimately prevail. If darkness is the absence of light, a turning away rather than an opposing presence, then the task is perhaps simpler in principle, if not in practice. Turn toward the light. Return to the source, and allow what was shadow to become once more illuminated. Both of these understandings carry a genuine wisdom about the moral life, and both arise ultimately from the same deep human intuition that the world is morally structured and that how we live within it matters. The complementary dark, Yin and Yang in Taoist thought. Let us rest here for a moment before we continue. Let us allow the framing to shift not dramatically but gently, the way the quality of light changes as clouds move across the sun. Because the tradition we are about to enter approaches the relationship between darkness and light from a very different angle, not as conflict, not as struggle, not as the drama of choice between opposing forces, but as something closer to rhythm, to breath, to the way a river knows how to move without being told. The tradition is Taoism, and it emerged in ancient China in the centuries around 500 years before the Common Era, in roughly the same era that the Upanishadic thinkers were reflecting beside Indian rivers, and that the great philosophers of Greece were beginning their inquiries. The central text of Taoist thought, a small and extraordinary collection of reflections attributed to a sage known as Lao Tzu, is called the Tao Te Ching. The word Tao, sometimes spelled Tao, carries meanings of way, path, or the underlying nature of things. It is the word for the ground of reality itself, the principle from which all things arise and to which all things return. To approach Taoism through imagery rather than argument. Imagine a mountain, not a dramatic, jagged peak, but an old mountain rounded by thousands of years of rain and wind, covered with forest on its lower slopes, bare and still at its summit. Water falls on this mountain and finds its way, without effort or struggle, down through the rocks and the roots until it reaches the valley and the river. The river does not force its way through the landscape. It finds the natural path of least resistance, and in doing so, it shapes the land more profoundly than any act of force could manage. This quality of natural movement, of acting in alignment with the underlying pattern of things rather than against it, is central to Taoist understanding. And it is the context in which the famous symbol of Yin and Yang must be understood. In Taoist thought, Yin and Yang are not enemies. They are not opposing forces in conflict with each other. They are complementary qualities, aspects of a single whole that require each other in order to be what they are: darkness and light, stillness and movement, receptivity and expression, softness and firmness, the cool of winter and the warmth of summer, the silence between sounds and the sounds themselves. The familiar circular symbol, a dark half and a light half, each containing within it a small circle of the opposite color, curving together into a perfect whole, carries the essence of this understanding within its very shape. Neither side dominates. Neither side is eliminated. Each contains, at its heart, the seed of the other, and together they complete a wholeness that neither could constitute alone. This is a profoundly different vision of the relationship between darkness and light than what we have encountered in Persian or Christian thought. The difference is worth sitting with quietly for a moment. In Zoroastrian and Christian understanding, darkness and evil are forces to be opposed, resisted, and ultimately overcome. The moral life is, in large part, a project of movement away from one pole and toward another. Good must prevail over evil. Light must overcome darkness. The struggle is real and its outcome matters. In Taoist understanding, the relationship between yin and yang is not a struggle at all. It is a dance. The darkness does not need to be defeated for the light to be meaningful. The winter does not need to be eliminated for the summer to be welcome. Stillness does not need to be conquered for movement to be beautiful. Each quality is what it is precisely because the other exists, and the deepest harmony is not found by eradicating one side, but by moving in natural alignment with the rhythm that encompasses both. This does not mean, in Taoist understanding, that there is no such thing as disorder or wrongness. It means that disorder is understood as a disruption of natural balance rather than the activity of an opposing evil force. When things go wrong, when individuals, communities, or rulers act in ways that cause harm, the Taoist understanding tends to describe this as a moving out of alignment with the Tao, the underlying natural order, rather than as the triumph of a malevolent power. And the remedy is not war against the disorder, but a return to natural simplicity, to the quiet attentiveness that allows one to perceive and move in harmony with the way things naturally are. There is a passage in the Tao Te Ching that reflects this quality with characteristic gentleness. The highest good, it suggests, is like water nourishing all things without struggle, moving naturally to the lowest places that others disdain, and precisely through this non-forcing quality, being more persistently effective than any act of force could be. Water does not fight the rock. It simply moves around it, and over millennia, it shapes the rock into something beautiful. This is wisdom of a very different order than the warrior's wisdom, the wisdom that knows which battles to fight and how to win them. It is the wisdom of long patience, of natural alignment, of the recognition that the deepest forces of existence do not need to be pushed. They need only to be understood and followed, the way a river follows the shape of the valley it has spent thousands of years carving into being. Chapter 4: Why the Mind Divides. We have now moved through 3 very different ways of understanding the relationship between light and darkness, good and evil. The Persian understanding of genuine cosmic opposition. The Christian understanding of moral struggle within a universe oriented toward a single divine good. The Taoist understanding of complementary balance within a unified natural order. 3 different answers to a question that all 3 traditions have taken seriously. But there is a question beneath the question that we have not yet fully addressed. Why do human minds reach for this kind of contrast at all? Why is the language of light and darkness, of good and evil, of order and chaos, so persistently and universally present in human attempts to understand existence? This is a genuinely interesting philosophical question, and it does not have a single, simple answer. But several possibilities are worth reflecting on. The most immediate explanation is perceptual. Human beings experience the world through contrast. We do not perceive the quality of warmth in the abstract, we perceive it against the background of cold. We do not experience the relief of rest without the prior experience of effort. We do not recognize health until we have encountered sickness. Consciousness itself, in some sense, operates through distinction, through the ability to perceive that this is different from that. The mind that cannot make distinctions cannot navigate the world at all. If perception operates through contrast, then it is perhaps not surprising that the deepest questions about the nature of reality, about the ground of existence, about what is ultimately real and what is ultimately valuable tend to be framed in terms of contrast as well. Light and darkness are not only meteorological facts, they are among the most immediate, most universally experienced contrasts available to human awareness. Every human being who has ever lived has experienced the difference between light and darkness, and has had time in the long hours of darkness when activity slows and the mind turns inward to reflect on what that difference means. Beyond the perceptual, there is the moral dimension. Human beings are beings who make choices. Unlike the rock or the river, we can do otherwise than we do. We can choose to speak truth or to deceive. We can choose to act with care or with cruelty. And living with this reality, living as beings who are always choosing, always shaping themselves and their world through the direction of their choices, seems naturally to give rise to the question of what the right direction is. What is the better choice? What kind of being should I be trying to become? What kind of world should I be trying to create? The language of light and darkness offers a way of answering this question that is both immediate and universal. It locates the better choice in the direction of light, of clarity, of warmth, of visibility, of the conditions under which living things flourish. And it places the worst choice in the direction of darkness, of opacity, of confusion, of the conditions under which things diminish and suffer. These are not arbitrary metaphors. They are rooted in genuine features of embodied human experience. And then there is perhaps the deepest dimension of all the existential one. Human beings are aware of their own mortality in a way that, as far as we know, most other animals are not. We know that we will die. We know that the people we love will die. We know that the world we inhabit is fragile and impermanent. And we carry this knowledge with us through all the ordinary hours of an ordinary life. It generates, beneath the surface of everyday activity, a particular kind of question, a question about meaning, about whether existence is oriented towards something rather than nothing, about whether there is a structure to reality that offers some ground of significance beneath the inevitable loss and change of mortal life. The vision of cosmic moral struggle, the sense that the universe has a direction, that light is genuinely moving against darkness, that good has a genuine weight and reality, that evil lacks answers this question with a particular kind of reassurance. It says, your choices matter. The direction you move matters. The universe itself is oriented towards something, and the way you live contributes to or detracts from that orientation. This is not a small consolation. For many human beings across many ages, it has been a foundation, a reason to act well, even when acting well is difficult, a reason to persist in the direction of light, even when the darkness feels close. The Taoist vision offers a different kind of reassurance. It says, you are already within the order you seek. The Tao is not distant. It is not behind a barrier that must be overcome. It is the underlying nature of things, available to anyone who can quiet the activity of the anxious, grasping mind enough to perceive it. You do not need to fight your way to harmony. You need only to stop fighting against it, to release the artificial tensions and misdirected efforts that separate you from the natural movement of things, and to allow what is already there to guide you. Both of these visions are responses to the same human situation. Both arise from the reality of being a conscious, mortal, choosing being in a world that is genuinely complex and often difficult. Both offer, in very different registers, an account of what that complexity means and what might be done with it. What is remarkable is not that they differ. What is remarkable is that across all the distance of culture and geography and historical period, human beings have continued to reach for this kind of account, continued to ask whether the contrast they perceive in the world around them reflects something real about the nature of things, and continue to organize their understanding of the moral life around what they find when they try to answer that question. The space between. There is something honest about the image of dawn that we began with tonight. The moment before full light, when the sky holds both night and morning in the same breath, when the stars are still visible, but the horizon has already begun to glow, this moment does not resolve the contrast between light and darkness. It holds them together. It is itself a kind of answer, not one or the other, but the living space in which the transition happens. Many of the most thoughtful reflections on light and darkness across many traditions have located their deepest insights, not at the poles, not in pure light or pure darkness, but somewhere in the territory between. The Zoroastrian tradition, for all its moral clarity about the opposition of truth and deception, also taught that the final state of existence would be one of renewal and reintegration, not simply the elimination of darkness, but a transformation in which all souls were restored to their proper relationship with the light. Even within a tradition of genuine moral duality, the ultimate horizon was not division but wholeness. The early Christian mystical tradition, the stream of Christian thought that sought direct experience of the divine rather than merely doctrinal understanding, often found its most resonant language in the imagery of darkness, as well as light. The divine reality these thinkers reflected was ultimately beyond all images and all concepts, including the concept of light itself. There was a tradition, sometimes called the apophatic or negative way, that approached the divine not through affirmation, but through the honest recognition of all that the divine exceeded. The ultimate ground of being was beyond light and darkness, beyond good and evil, not because it was neutral to these contrasts, but because it was their source and therefore could not be contained within them. And in Taoism, the recognition that Yin and Yang are both expressions of the single underlying Tao suggests something similar, that beneath the dance of complementary opposites, there is a wholeness that the dance expresses but does not exhaust. The Tao itself, Laozi reflected, cannot be named. Any name one gives it immediately becomes inadequate, because naming divides what is whole. The Tao is not light and it is not darkness. It is whatever gives rise to both. This convergence across such very different traditions toward the sense that the deepest reality exceeds the contrast through which we approach it is itself worth holding quietly. It does not mean that the contrasts are illusions or that moral distinctions do not matter. The Zoroastrian who chose truth over deception was doing something real. The Christian who turned toward love rather than cruelty was doing something real. The Taoist who released unnecessary effort and found the natural way was doing something real. The contrasts that organize these traditions are not errors. They are necessary approaches to something that exceeds any single approach. Perhaps the most honest thing that can be said from a position of calm and neutral reflection is this: the human mind needs contrast in order to navigate the world, and it needs moral categories in order to live a life of integrity and care. The language of light and darkness, of good and evil, serves this need with a power and immediacy that few other languages can match. It has been used across thousands of years and dozens of cultures to help human beings orient themselves to remember that choices have weight, that the direction of a life matters, and that there is something worth moving toward, rather than simply drifting in whatever direction the current happens to carry one. But the deepest traditions have also recognized, sometimes quietly, sometimes explicitly, that the contrast is not the final word, that the reality the contrast points toward exceeds the pointing, that light and darkness are ways of speaking about something that is at its ground unified, and that the long human project of understanding what that something is has not yet reached its end and may never reach it, because the question itself is one of the ways that consciousness participates in the very mystery it is trying to understand. The light at the edge of the sky. The sky is changing now. The darkness that was uniform an hour ago has begun to differentiate, deepening in some places, softening in others, allowing the first, barely perceptible suggestion of color to enter at the horizon. The stars are still there. They will be there for a little while longer, but the light is coming. This daily event, this transition that every human being who has ever lived has witnessed, has never been simply a meteorological fact for the human mind. It has always been something more. A reminder, perhaps. A kind of recurrence that carries meaning without quite being able to state it. The darkness was real. The cold was real. The disorientation of not being able to see clearly was real. And now the light is coming, and with it the warmth and the visibility and the renewed ability to perceive the world in all its detail and texture and color. Every tradition we have visited tonight has looked at this event and found in it an image of something it was trying to say about the deepest nature of things. The Zoroastrian sage saw in the sunrise the daily confirmation that truth and light are genuinely moving in the direction of ultimate triumph. The early Christian believers saw in the dawn the image of resurrection of something that had been lost to darkness returning to light, and the suggestion that this return was not just meteorological but cosmological, woven into the structure of things at the deepest level. The Taoist teacher saw in the slow, inevitable movement from night to day the natural rhythm of the Tao itself, Yin, releasing into Yang, stillness moving into action, darkness opening gently into light, and both arising from and returning to the wholeness that underlies them. These are not competing views of the same sunrise. They are different attentions brought to the same inexhaustible fact. And what they share beneath all the genuine differences of cosmology and metaphysics and moral architecture is a commitment to paying attention, to taking the contrast seriously, to recognizing that the world is not morally neutral, and that a human life is not simply a duration to be endured, but a direction to be chosen. The question of whether the universe is structured around a genuine moral opposition, or around a natural complementary balance, or around something that exceeds both of these framings. This question has not been answered to the satisfaction of all inquirers in all ages. It may be among the questions that the human mind will always carry rather than ever fully resolve. But perhaps the carrying of it is itself a kind of answer. The fact that human beings have continued, in every culture and every age, to ask about the nature of good and evil, to reach for the language of light and darkness, to take seriously the moral weight of the choices they make, this continuity suggests something, not a specific doctrine, not a settled theology, but a persistent, deeply human conviction that the contrast matters, that how one moves through the world, in which direction, with what quality of intention and attention, that this is not trivial, that it is, in some sense, everything. The horizon is unmistakably bright now. The stars are withdrawing into the pale blue that is spreading quietly across the sky. The world is becoming visible again in all its familiar detail, the shapes of trees, the surface of water, the texture of the earth. It is, as it is every morning, a kind of gift. Not a dramatic gift, a quiet one. The simple renewal of the capacity to see. May that capacity, the capacity to see clearly, to distinguish truth from deception, care from cruelty, the genuine from the false continue to be what so many traditions have understood it to be. A light that is available to anyone willing to turn toward it in the long and patient practice of a life lived with honest attention. This has been First Beliefs. Thank you for sitting quietly with us in the space between night and morning. Until next time, may your questions be gentle and your understanding slowly growing like light at the edge of the sky.